Hannah Pellimer, I'm saying it wrong, aren't I? All right. Senior VP of Development and Production at Mar Vista. Marshall Louis, a partner at Adaptive Studios, and Andrew Sugarman, a producer of feature films. Now, we'd like to know a little bit about you fellows. Is anybody out there a content creator? All right. Any talent? Or I guess that falls in the same category, possibly. All right. Any industry execs or lawyers or agents? All righty. Well, you can represent your entire people. All right. We're going to start the panel, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end if people have them. Well, since we're supposed to be discussing the deal-making process, and different types of content require different strategies in deal-making, can each of you describe how the process works in your areas? I guess we can start. Anybody can start, or we can go down the line if you want.
Sure. So I run a company that focuses on scripted and unscripted entertainment. We have an overall deal with the Sony Studios, and we focus a lot on packaging up intellectual property, which covers everything from named talent like Mariah Carey, or intellectual property rights, i.e. book ownerships, or rights from large companies or brands to give us access to something like, if there's a sporting event and we want to sort of film it or do something around it. And that's essential because people in any part of the industry, I think, want to buy things that have already been bought, which is a circular reference, but it seems to be the case that people want to know that it's something out there that's got gravitas, that's got something that you can actually buy beyond just here's a thought. And so we do basically 3 different types of deals. We do partnerships where we share in the idea that we're sharing with, that we're putting together. We do deals that make them global partners, which is on a bigger level, which taps them into all the revenue streams. Sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's bigger. And the third type is we just do limited sort of licensing where we just pay one-off fees to acquire a certain set of rights. There is no right or wrong way to make a deal, but making a deal is a lot like dating. You've got to know what to say and when to say it and when not to say things.
Yeah, we do 3 kind of distinct but interrelated things at Archer Gray. We're creative producers of film and TV. So we had a movie called 20th Century Women that was out recently. We just wrapped a movie with Fox Searchlight. We have TV, nothing on air yet, but set up at places like Amazon, Paramount, TriStar. And then we're financiers, and we have kind of a very specific and balanced portfolio. I think of development financing, kind of gap and opportunistic lending, documentary financing, and the newest area for this year, which we haven't done yet, will be in digital short-form series. And then we're venture capital investors in media tech. So we're doing, I would say, pretty much across the board, one-off deals for all of those activities. So one-off deals to make an investment in startup, one-off deal to kind of set up a writer on one of our development projects and then have that set up with a financier and then that kind of sold to a distributor. So we're playing kind of producer and financier roles a lot of times on our projects. So yeah, I guess that kind of just covers.
Is the one-off because you're not really sure about how much you want to work with the entity?
Yes, but not in that kind of, that makes it sound bad. No, I think because our projects are so different that we want to be able to set them up in bespoke ways. Now, we have a partnership with a foreign sales company, so there's certain things that we want to make repeatable and not have to kind of reinvent the wheel every time, but, the movie that we did with Anna Perna and A24, like that made sense for 20th Century Women in a way that maybe it wouldn't have made sense both in terms of scope and director and all that type of stuff for the Fox Searchlight deal we just did. Or for, projects that we've done previously with other kind of financiers and distributors. So for now, the slate is so varied that we want to kind of set everything up in a bespoke way.
I feel like there's a lot of similarities with Mar Vista's model is what you talked about. We're a bit of a mini studio. So we are a financier, we're a production company, we're a distributor. I think it kind of breaks out in a similar way where we have international output deals, and my responsibility is really to oversee our slate of original movies. So we did about 40 films last year. And so some of those are specifically targeting those existing deals. And then we're also partnering a lot of times with networks on the front end, working with them to develop and package original movies. And then on sort of the third tier, we're really looking to branch into more of the financing side on independent features, and looking at the theatrical space, transactional domestically specifically. So I think, with our deals, when I approach each of those three areas, a lot of times, the movies that I know are going to fulfill our international output deals, there's a very specific box that I know we have to fit into, both budget-wise and creative. And so there really is, it's sort of a cookie cutter in a way, where I know that things have to fit exactly what those parameters are. But when it comes to approaching some of our newer deals on the feature side, it's exciting because we really want to make it work with the filmmaker, and so we're much more open to negotiating different types of back end or partnerships or different financing models. So it's a little bit of everything, I feel like.
Yes, Adaptive Studios is a little bit of everything as well. We started as a company that mines abandoned Hollywood vetted projects that gets caught in the studio system and reimagine them using kind of easier to break through platforms like books, graphic novels, digital series as a way to bring those stories back to life in the hopes of bringing them back to film and TV. And that's sort of over the last few years turned into a multi-platform production studio where we are doing short-form digital content through, we produced Project Greenlight on HBO last fall, or a year and a half ago, and from that launched Project Greenlight Digital Studios, which includes contests for emerging filmmakers, short-form digital series with emerging filmmakers. We also have a publishing business, so we have an exclusive output deal with Barnes & Noble where books come out always with an eye towards bringing them back to film, traditional film or TV, or that includes, the Netflix and Amazons and Hulus of the world, kind of that bigger platform. And on those, we are working with bigger partners a lot of the time, and sort of A-list talent. And then we have traditional film and TV projects, including Project Greenlight, which was obviously on HBO. We did a show called The Runner, which was a non-scripted show for Go90, which is Verizon's new platform. So when you talk about deal making, we are constantly all over the place, both ingesting IP and making interesting deals with stuff that can be extremely complicated on the rights and chain of title side, to doing publishing deals with authors, to doing sort of smaller digital deals with young emerging filmmakers to give them a little bit of money to go make something, to doing deals with studios where we're setting up books or projects at Fox and Netflix and places like that. So it's one of the fun things about what we're doing at Adaptive and where things are in the industry today, which is that looks very different than it did a few years ago, where there were just a few places to go. And we're trying to take some of those projects that may have been made for a time when studios might make like a mid-budget movie that they would never make today, but it could make a great TV show or even a digital series. And so that's some of the thinking behind what we're doing at Adaptive.
Hi. I've been producing in various different capacities for many years. I run my own company now, but I've come out of the independent producing world both as a line producer on some fairly high-end movies and as a producer developing my own content. So I've bounced back and forth over the years between the two. Now mostly on the creative side and developing, we're developing about 20 projects that vary from fairly high-end $40, $50 million films that will be studio released to some smaller projects. We're even looking at getting into the direct-to-video or direct-to-streaming world, which I hadn't been in till fairly recently, but it's part of the model that one has to embrace now, that there are so many different ways to make something. And we're looking at a lot of the content that I've developed over the years and seeing that there are different ways, such as turning it into television series. And I've taken a number of projects that were initially feature film scripts, and we've adapted them to become television series. and find that actually they're better suited in that there are many stories that need to be told over more than a 2-hour time span and that can engage an audience and have many more chapters to them than the traditional acts that you see in a feature film. So we're looking at not only different methodology of distribution and of finance for films, but also of different ways that people regard content. And as a lot of people have said, the television series now has become the new novel. And people treat binging and even just regular series watching, episodic series, as more the experience that's closer to reading a novel than watching a regular movie. So these are all things that we're adapting to, also getting involved in the digital space in a streaming service where I'm involved with a company that is going to be streaming concerts and has already got some proprietary technology that's involving cell phone transmissions and VR. And so that's also kind of exciting to get into that area and find the ways that there's a crossover between content creation and that methodology of delivery. And we've gotten a little bit away from the idea of negotiating, but all of this requires much in the way of negotiating and thinking, and I guess we're going to dive deeper into that.
Well, thank you. Well, getting back to the negotiation part and starting with features, the first area that we'd like to discuss, what is it that's different in the negotiating process with a feature that would be different from anything else? And the same with an indie, although, I wonder anymore, is there anything that's not really an indie? Does the process change from doing, I don't know what a traditional feature is anymore, versus an indie of deal making?
Is that you looking at me? Is that for me?
Oh, any of you. Anybody can answer. I don't have my glasses
Well,
on.
yeah, no, it's fine. I don't know. I'm not sure that I can describe the difference in terms of negotiating on a feature, except that when you're doing a feature film, there are so many different things that need to be negotiated. And it starts with whatever the IP is that's being required and the negotiation for those rights, whether it's an option or a purchase or developing something from a story or a real life story where rights have to be obtained or a screenplay that has to be optioned or a writer that's being hired. So there's initially that negotiation that has to happen. And then down the line, there are many, many negotiations. Of course, the most complex is the financing, which can really undo people who go in it without some level of experience or knowledge about what they're in for, because it's not just a matter of the old days where, a studio is putting up money. Okay, what's my deal? Okay, well, you negotiate your deal with the studio, and that's the end of it. Now there's often 4, 5, 6, or more different entities involved in the financing of a film that is other than a straight studio finance movie, which most of them are. In terms of the percentages, probably 80, 90% of the movies are in some form independent. So it is negotiating all the various aspects of that, the equity, the mezzanine, the debt, the foreign sales contracts, the foreign sales agreements, the distribution deal for domestic, and then how do those all dovetail with the deals you've already made for the IP, and is everything going to work together? And I've found that as a producer, I need to be my own lawyer for so much of that, because if you have to go to a lawyer every time to ask you a question, these things take way too long and are way too expensive. So you have to be able to make very quick business decisions and very quick, be on your feet to negotiate or to navigate, because a lot of negotiation is navigation and not just deal making, and to form structures. So much of negotiation is structure creation, where you're literally building the house, but you're, the architect, the contractor, the designer, and the client all at the same time, putting together what this building is going to look like.
Yeah.
That's my little...
No, I was just going to double down on that. I would say if there's kind of, whether you're a director, producer, writer, kind of, anybody in that kind of group, I think you need to understand probably two things specifically, kind of chain of title, deal making, and what that means, and finance structure. I mean, you have to understand other things, including your own deal on the project and distribution deals, but I think those are probably to your point, the most complicated, the ones that don't happen in a single deal. Chain of title happens over in our case, being developing producers, sometimes over 6 or 7 or 8 years, and cleaning it up is very tricky. So, you're doing a deal today, but you need to be thinking about the implications of how you do a writer deal, how you do an option deal down the road, and then same thing when you're building the financing, because, the kind of great thing about the time we're in now is that there's so much capital available for making content, film in particular, but content in general. But it's all highly specialized. There's very few places where you go and they write a single check and it's all equity and you go make your movie. It's much more structured finance. And so understanding if you the first dollar you take in, if you're putting that person in first position or if they're kind of recouping against certain territories, what that means in terms of your ability to do the next deal and not kind of putting yourself behind the 8 ball, which happens a lot.
I would third that. I think, the most interesting thing for me has been, approaching everything from a creative producing perspective is having to also wear that business affairs legal hat and, making sure that you really do understand the implications of everything as these two have mentioned. And I think the other thing that we're seeing on specifically the feature film financing side is protecting for the variety of options that could happen with that movie potentially down the road. So series, we're finding a lot now that with the features that we're financing, we want to perhaps see them as a backdoor pilot someday or and have the rights for that so that we can take it potentially into another path. So I think that's the other piece is, a feature can still exist alone, but really it is going to be an IP once it's done. And so making sure that you are, like Vinay said, thinking those 5 steps ahead of what can happen with us.
But when Mar Vista's doing the deal, aren't they just getting all the rights from the start? Pretty much?
Sometimes, but not always. I mean, on the movies that are fulfilling our international output deals, yes. It is kind of, we do just write the check and it's go make your movie. So I think we are one of the few places that still do that. But we are looking at partnering now with different financiers, production companies, filmmakers, and so those deals look different. And usually they're with a higher level of talent, and so we do want to have a seat at the table going forward, depending on what happens.
All righty.
Yeah.
Moving on to reality TV and specials. Well, an opening question. Must one have an agent to facilitate deals with television networks? And if so, what is the role of the agent from your perspective with the content creator, since that's what a Goodly, and talent, since that's what a Goodly portion of our audience is?
I would say that in any deal making, no matter what you do in life, you'd want to have somebody who knows what they're doing. So if you don't know the ins and outs of what the precedents are, then you should have an agent or lawyer, right? It's just, it doesn't really matter what we're talking about. My father was a representative for buildings like this against insurance companies. Most people don't have someone represent them when they have a fire. They think, well, it's my insurance policy. I know everything about it. But you don't do it every day. You don't, but my father did. And so he was a specialist. Like an agent is a specialist. If you went to court, would you represent yourself? No, you'd find someone who knew what they were doing, right? So, but that's not always so easy because sometimes you can't find an agent and sometimes you have to do it your best. So what do you have to do? Like anything else, as a piece of talent or producer, you have to find people who will help you out along the way, do something as a friend. But ultimately, you want somebody who has a shorthand that knows where all the bodies are buried and will get you the best deal, and so that you feel like you know that you are actually getting what you think you should get, right? And that's partially what, that way you can go do what you do, which is create or make or star in whatever it is. And there are people, especially now that the digital world has opened up, where, 5, 10 years ago, people did not have experience. So there's a slightly different culture in the agenting and lawyering world, I think, that are willing to look at people that don't have a long list of credits, because today's no credit person is someone with 10 million followers or subscribers, right? So that mentality has shifted for parts of the business, not all of it.
I can say, I went to a bunch of YouTube events, and it was very funny after a couple of years of going to these things randomly. Towards the end, there would be big agents there who were just meeting, the people with all the followers, where normally these people, wouldn't even show up at these events. But now they're there, and they're hunting for talent. What about you, Marshall?
Yeah, I would add
you
to
think?
that, and I'm more on the creative producing side as well, although obviously, get into the business affairs of it all. And I also have a background as a writer and director before starting in adaptive. So, my advice if you're a creator is it's great to have an agent. Certainly if you have a deal that comes your way or that you've created for yourself, it's good, as was said, to have someone who actually knows what they're looking at, because deals can get complicated, and that first deal you're offered is probably not a great one, just as a matter of course. But that said, in your relationships, or I've found that in my relationships on both sides of the table now with creators, young and experienced, and as one in the past with executives, is to keep an open line of communication, to be forthright and honest, to not disappear and hide behind your agents, but while still giving the space to do your job. And in a way, like, that's something that, they never teach you at film school, how to navigate what it's like to be a writer or a director or even a YouTuber who suddenly has reps, and the reps are trying to make certain decisions that, frankly, are not always in your best interest. And I think as agencies have changed, certain of them who can be amazing and amazing to have on your side are also enormous businesses in themselves that aren't necessarily set up to do the best for their talent. Apologies if I'm offending anybody here, but I don't know how other people feel about it.
I like that you're offending people. That makes for good panel. Can I just add to that? I think one of the things that people forget is when they get an agent at the first time, they're thankful, they're grateful. Somebody's going to help them, and it's sort of you give that person extra credit and power to somehow make decisions because they quote unquote know better. But I will tell you this: if you look where the money is, you always have to remember the 90-10 rule, right? You get 90, they get 10%. So you have to remember that you are the one in charge. So I'm sort of, and it's easy to forget that. But when they get 90 and you get 10, then they can make the decision. Until then, it's your call.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, we're coming at it potentially from a more outside of the box perspective on a lot of stuff, because I'll find that, I'll approach a deal usually with a great relationship with the content creator or the filmmaker. And then sometimes they have the big agent and they sort of don't understand either the space that we're working in, and they will slow things down. And a lot of times they can kind of mess it up.
And as Andrew was saying, I think there was a time when it was like, okay, the job was a studio. You're writing three drafts, 3 passes on a script for a studio, and you have your quote, and you're working with the same studios all the time. Deals look very different now, and there's so many, and sometimes that deal that doesn't pay you a lot up front but allows you to make something is a really great opportunity for you, but your agent's going to make $500 off it, and I think that that's sometimes, it's hard to remember that they work for you, and sometimes that's only barely true, even, that they work for you when you're starting out. So it can be really difficult to sort of push that forward, and that's when I think, again, leaving space to get the best deal you can, absolutely, and to but I know I would often think of, like, what's the number, when I was, making the deals again as a writer, like, what's the number and the deal at which I'd be willing to do this? I'm not going to be, like, resentful and pissed off 3 months from now when this becomes difficult. And like, I'm willing, and I know in the back of my mind, I'm willing to do it for that, even if my lawyer or my agent is pushing for a much, much bigger number.
I would just pull it back. I know nothing about reality and unscripted TV, but just to pull it back to kind of the TV question, I will say, in the kind of continuum of kind of openness or kind of ways, platforms in which you can just kind of make content and reach your audience or get it out there, TV still continues to be the most gated. Probably digital is the most open. Even film, you can kickstart your movie, make a movie, it can go to Sundance. All of a sudden you can be on the scene and get Netflix's attention or Sony Picture Classics attention or whatever. TV, in my kind of limited experience, continues to still be the kind of walled garden of this business. And if you were talking about trying to set up a reality show with Bravo or Food Network or something like that, you'll be hard-pressed, I think, to do it just with elbow grease. That is one area in which TV agents, I think, are a necessity. And I don't know if you guys...
Yeah, good.
No, I would agree with that. And also, you want your IP certainly protected in those cases, because when you're talking about reality TV, that's one area where it's easily taken and they can just run without you. So that's one that really, yeah, you should probably go through an agent or some kind of representative.
But you also have to remember that I think it was Mike Ovitz who said it years ago, that the agent's job is to field phone calls, and that's pretty much how they view their job. So you can never rely on them to be the proactive one. You have to be proactive, and sometimes even tell your agent, I want this script or this project to go here, 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 and here, and then follow that up with them, because they cannot be assumed to be the entrepreneur in the equation. It's you that has to be the entrepreneur. And what you can rely on them is to answer the phone when there's money on the other end of it. And if you look at it that way, you can kind of handle them better and know what you're dealing with. And that's not a negative thing. They're overwhelmed. Most agents at big agencies are overwhelmed, and they have an incredible amount of clients to service. And so the squeaky wheel, the noisy phone call, that's where their attention goes.
Those are all good points. And I would say, having been on the opposite side of agents for 26 years, oftentimes they might, not focus as much on things that are really important to you, like, I don't know, the title or other projects you're doing and having to give exclusivity. So if there's something that's not related to the money and it's really important to you, feel free to speak up and do whatever. All right, so moving on to web series. Is dealing with the big streaming players, Amazon, Netflix, and Hulu, much different from dealing with television networks and film studios when you're making a deal?
Yes and no, right? So is it still a large entity that has a structure and set of business points that they want to get done, on which they will give on some and not go out of the box on others? Absolutely, right? No, it's not just they make it up. There's a piece of paper, the business affairs gets issued, that's the deal points, that's what you navigate. Now, are they different deal points and different finance related to that? Yes, and so that's where it's different. Netflix notoriously buys up all the rights. You sell a show to NBC and they, it's a different deal. They don't buy up all the rights, you get to take it. So it's a different business model, but it is largely the same process, just slightly different way of dancing through it.
If you had to throw out one or two, is there anything in particular that jumps out about Amazon, Netflix, or Hulu?
Well, I worked for 5 years at Microsoft before I got into television. I did interactive TV, so I have a little bit of sort of the cross-section of both content creation and sort of what Amazon and Netflix are. And the thing about a tech-driven company is it's very data-driven, right? It's very decision-oriented. They boil things down and they do it a lot quicker. And they put things on a small piece of paper like a PowerPoint slide that basically distill a lot of discussion points into like a go, no-go decision, right? So the culture.
Is that good or bad?
I, as a creator, find it to be excellent, because the last thing you want to do is spend a lot of time watching people change their opinions based on the last opinion that was just given. And we all get frustrated by that, right? That's part of why the entertainment industry grinds to a halt sometimes, because it's, sort of nobody knows, so nobody wants to put their neck out, and it all comes down to one person's voice. The decision-making process that Amazon and Netflix, and even when Microsoft was doing their stuff down here years ago under Nancy, was much more like, yes or no, let's do it. And it wasn't, so there was a decision that was made quicker. It was based on a metric that you could actually track, and they have to justify here. I think the thing you have to keep in mind is the folks who live in LA have to justify what they do and explain it to the rest of the folks in their tech world. So the folks here in LA at Amazon literally have to sort of help the people in the technology sector who don't know anything about what we do. And so they do that by distilling things into very simple ways of understanding it. And that can move things a lot quicker. And I think that's great. And I think that's why they thrive in their other world, and that's why they're doing so well, I think, in this world.
Well, if I can be specific and on that same point, what Amazon, Netflix, and Hulu will probably start doing the same thing is that they're making their decisions based on algorithms. And it is strictly based on viewer responses to existing material. So they have literally a quote, scientific way of determining this actor, this type of material, this director, this size story, and they literally run algorithms based on the millions of pieces of content that they already have that viewers are responding to, which data they do not share, by the way, and it's quite private. And that's how decisions are made within those companies. Now, it's very different than how the studios operate, which is more on the old-fashioned kind of combination of gut-driven and what's the foreign sales value of this actor kind of approach. And there's a couple of articles recently. There's one just the other day, but there have been quite a few in the last year about how, and there's a little bit of a diversion, but just to mention it quickly, how movie stars don't matter in terms of the cost of the movie star versus the return on investment. So if you structure it, go literally from an ROI point of view, looking at as a way of, any big corporation would look at what am I spending versus what I'm returning. Major stars do not have an algorithmic value in terms of return on investment. That being said, we still operate that way. So it's something that people have to take into consideration.
In
And I
the
run
digital
this.
world? Do you think even in the digital world we still operate that way?
No, I'm not so much in the digital world. And that's why I'm saying that the way Amazon and Netflix operate is very different, because they will do things that are based strictly on the relationship of the elements in the material to what they expect to get in return.
Although
So-
Marshall, with Project Greenlight and some of your other ones, you look like you have something.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think I was going to add that Amazon, Hulu, and Netflix all have actually extremely different models and extremely different masters that they're serving. So it's not really, they're all the big digital streaming players right now, with Apple and Facebook coming in, but they all have very different approaches. So Amazon, on the feature film side, it has focused on this kind of niche prestige theatrical release first, and then they release it on their VOD, and they sometimes partner with distributors, and they're really looking, Ted Hope is running it, and I think Bob Burney the other person? Yeah, who are like independent indie film veterans with excellent taste and excellent filmmaker and producer relationships. Then you've got Netflix, which is trying to service certain niche audiences, and if then they get a breakout like Stranger Things or like Making a Murderer, like they're happy if those service the people who like to watch true crime documentaries or who like to watch, YA sci-fi, but then if it starts to filter out to a larger audience, that's a hit for them. And they have a very different thing beyond just the sort of Kevin Spacey plus David Fincher, meets like equals success. And we just made a film with them called Coin Heist that was a YA film that, they were very happy because it hit the people who watch Pretty Little Liars, and it was starred one of the stars of Pretty Little Liars. It was like a YA thriller. And Hulu is very star-driven. That's all they want, are packages with A-list talent, and are a little bit more like a traditional TV player, except they want a lot of work having done before you've even walked in. They want all three of them actually want scripts and packages and all of that. So, they're all very different, but they're definitely the kind of elephants in the room. And there's sort of a joke that like you go out with something and it's extremely baked, like you've got all the scripts and an 80-page Bible and your talent and everything. And then you start bringing it to like NBC and the studios, then it means like Amazon, Hulu, and Netflix passed, and you did all this work for nothing. So, it's always changing, but they're not the same thing, those three.
I would say the thing that does unify them that's nice for us, like us, Archer Gray specifically as non-writing, non-show running producers, is that it removes the necessity to kind of go through the television studios, which are kind of, I guess I should watch my words, but, annoying intermediaries that themselves are kind of, using an old model, which is largely built on taste, and not to kind of devalue taste, but the executive that brings in a show is guessing what the studio head will kind of approve, and they're guessing what the network will, take from pilot to series. It's kind of and there's no science to it, and it changes based on whatever happened last month, most likely on Netflix, and they're like, oh, well, we need an Orange is the New Black or whatever. So that's a frustrating, long, kind of unscientific process, whereas if you're talking to Hulu and Netflix and Amazon, and granted their reason for talking to you might be very different, which I would agree with Marshall on, they're doing it because they're developing that or financing that show because they have a very good sense that that show will work for them. And there's not this kind of intermediary step towards like, okay, well, we're going to develop it, maybe take it to pilot, and then we have to go pitch it to somebody else. And that, I would say, has kind of been really refreshing for us as producers, is kind of coming more from the indie film world. It's nice to cut out that extra step.
And I think the reason, I'm going to guess, but part of the reason I think why someone like a Netflix would be more willing to not go through intermediary is the DNA culture of what the internet is, right? The innovation of the internet at large writ is, it's just open to anyone. There's nobody programming it, everybody's programming it, right? So that was the big thing. So if you start with that, you know, these people who are all running these companies, have been around since, you know, they probably got their start when the web browser was born in the 90s, right? And so that's the way they approach things. And they're like, well, something good comes from an open source idea. So it changes the model, which is not how Hollywood ever grew up.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that all the Netflix, Hulu, Amazon are still working with the television studios and getting
they are.
shows from them and
Sure.
traditional showrunners. I was kind of speaking I would agree with you, but also very specifically from us, not being from coming more from a film world and into this TV world. I think we've had a better or a smoother experience working directly with those platforms.
Well, you're special.
That's all I wanted
That's
acknowledgement
what,
of.
That's
yeah,
all. You should have
exactly.
just gotten there earlier. Yeah.
Right.
Do any of you anticipate that you'll, oh, Hannah, did you?
No, I mean, the only thing I was going to point out, which I find exciting, is that, with the Amazon, Hulu, and Netflix, I think there's an opportunity for the creator, right, to not have to go through those various hurdles, have the whole package, have the showrunner, have everything figured out. And if you see shows like Stranger Things or The OA or, it's really filmmaker driven, right? You'll see the same writer-director overseeing every single episode. And so that's cool because to me that just seems like it's an extension of the indie feature space, right? Just into more of a long-form format.
There's also, again, towards the sort of less oversight. You know, there's often talk about how there's less oversight when you go into something like a Netflix, and that's sort of been partially true, but not always true. But I mean, the sheer fact that they sometimes buy things straight to series as opposed to go through a presentation or a pilot to a short season one to a long season one. The culture is a little bit more like, well, if we've said yes, let's just say yes and give people the role to do it. And again, I think that's more because it's a little bit more DNA of data-driven as opposed to taste-driven. And they're like, we bought you for your taste, go make it.
Yeah.
And that's, as a creator, that's fantastic.
That is-
Yeah, and that was the experience with Netflix that we had and that a lot of other people have, which is, like you said, it's a binary decision where they want to see a lot up front. They want to trust the partners,
Right.
but then they're not like second guessing and morphing the thing as you're going, which is what like the networks are so notorious for doing, which is like, well, why'd you buy this in the first place? Netflix, I can speak specifically for Netflix, they really don't do that. It's like, okay, we like you, we like your previous work, we know you as producers can deliver it, we like the filmmaker, let's go make it. And they make a decision once, and then they leave you alone as long as you're, responsible. And that's revolutionary, and I think that's why they're doing so well.
Well, there's another reason for that, which is that they're not advertiser supported, and which is true also of HBO, Starz, Showtime, et cetera, that their model is to increase subscribers, not to get advertising revenues. So they're not based on overnight ratings or even 5-day ratings. They're based on a long-term building of clientele, which is why it's important for them to have breakout shows, a Stranger Things or a Game of Thrones or whatever it is that makes people have to subscribe in order to watch that show. The model for networks, the traditional model, is that they have to do pilots, and they do a ridiculously large number of pilots compared to the amount of shows that get greenlit, because those pilots have to then be tested, and they're tested in front of focus groups, and they're tested to see what the responses are in order to justify to advertisers why they're putting the show on the air. And then they have to justify it again when they go to the upfronts every year, which we're just having now, in order to justify that they've greenlit these shows and to put on a whole big show. And so they get the advertisers to pre-buy for the season. It's a completely different model. And so I think it's really, I find it extremely encouraging that we have a very different way that's very filmmaker driven, very material driven, and it's not lowest common denominator driven.
Do any of you anticipate that you'll be doing web deals with some of the other and the smaller players in the future?
We have done several. I don't know, have you at Mar Vista been starting to work with some of the newer players?
Yeah, we are. I mean, actually, yeah, Marie is. Yes.
She stole one of our. Star employees a couple of years ago. I'm still hurting from it.
We're sitting next to each other on the, so, you know. Go ahead.
Oh, no, so we do a lot of digital series. We have, actually, there's a company that launched in the US today. It's a French company called Black Pills, which is a new short form SVOD platform. They're trying to be sort of the Netflix for short form. We had a short form digital series called Pineapple that was at Sundance with a young filmmaker. That's one of their, I think they launched with 8 series. You can download, it's all free. And so that's a new platform that's trying to do elevated premium short form content for mobile. And it's a bunch of people who came out of Canal Plus, I think, and it's based in France. We did a deal for a series with Urban Movie Channel, which is an add-on, which is an SVOD platform specifically for like African American and multicultural audiences that you can get as its own OTT SVOD service. And it also is like an Amazon add-on channel if you've seen like Starz and Showtime, and it's owned by the AMC and Robert Johnson, who started BT. We're working with Complex Networks, which is Hearst. Complex was a magazine, like a kind of a started in like sneaker culture and hip hop, but they're trying to make it their millennial brand that's owned by Verizon and Hearst. We did the runner for Go 90, so like there's a lot of them out there, as you can tell. But like we did the runner for Go 90, which was this massive reality competition show. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were executive producers, and it got good numbers for the platform, but they've like, it's public that they've struggled to have people find Go 90 and watch stuff on it, even though they're spending a lot of money on content. So yeah, there's a lot of other players out there, and the deals are all ever evolving. I mean, you could talk for hours about the deal making for those.
All right, so going on a nuts and bolt for our final question before we get to questions, and if there aren't any, I guess we'll come back and ask some more questions. But is there anything you've ever done in a negotiation that that you learned a lesson from that you can share with the audience?
How long do you have?
I have a box sitting on my desk that is plexiglass, and it says, "Never again." And in it is shredded paper, and it's sealed. And I leave that on the desk because, you know, and everyone can relate to this, I'm sure. Deals have a clock. You know, no matter who you're dealing with, whether it's a talent or a piece of intellectual property or a buyer, and this, you know, and this deal, just you could tell the clock was ticking. We made the deal, and then it took too long. We actually got all the points negotiated, and then it just took too long to get the formal paperwork done. And you could just feel it. I mean, you can feel it like a hot summer's night air. It's just like creeping up on you, like that moment in the horror film where you're like, "Don't turn the corner. It's there. Get away." And sure enough, and you know, the good news was, I was pretty sure it was coming, and I was within about 48 hours right. So my sort of like, I'm about to get screwed radar is pretty good, I guess. You know, so that's sort of the lesson is you have to know the clock, and you have to read the body temperature, and sometimes it's longer than you think, sometimes it's shorter, but always keep your eye on that clock. And I keep that on my desk to remind me that from the moment they say yes, which you're super excited about, you get 1 inch or 1 moment closer to losing it every day you don't close it, right? You go from the height of yes to for every day it's sort of declining. So always keep your eye on the clock.
Great tip.
Yeah, I guess I would just say you'll never get through a project front to end without a mistake somewhere in the deals. Like that is the nature of the complexity of everything we do, from short form digital series to TV to film. You know, I guess what's the construction adage? You know, it's like measure twice, cut once. Like I think, you know, do that. Like if you're drafting a director agreement, you know, and you're a little unsure because maybe your lawyer is green or you're green, like have somebody else look at it. It is easier to solve than when you're going to a financier and the financier says, "Why did you give all your back end to the director? We can't do this deal." Like that is now a hard time to solve it. So yeah, but just there are going to be mistakes. I mean, this is kind of, everything moves too fast in this industry, and every time we reinvent the wheel on projects, which is annoying, but the nature of how projects get made in this industry, so there's going to be mistakes. get comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think the toughest thing is what we sort of talked about earlier, which is looking those 5 years ahead, or where you ultimately see the potential real outlet for whatever the IP or the project that you're working on. And I think that's where I've stumbled, or as Mar Vista as a company with business affairs, where we've really thought going in, oh, this is what we're going to do with this filmmaker or with this piece of content, and then we realize there's another opportunity, but we haven't necessarily protected for that, or we've spent too much up front and we can't now retrofit it into this other path that would actually be an amazing opportunity. So I think it's, for us, it's been just trying to anticipate as much as possible. So sort of seeing what your ultimate goal is for this, but then also knowing that, okay, maybe I should put some other stuff in here because it could go this way, or, having that flexibility. I don't know if that's specific enough, but that's where we've stumbled, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is not always true, but it feels like it's true a lot, which is it's never going to be as positive as that first meeting when you're all like, awesome, let's do this. And to both to hold, and you all shake hands and you half hug in the room and
signing?
What?
Not even after signing.
Well, and then it's going to get ugly, and then it'll get ugly on the creative side at some point. And so it's on both sides of the table. Which is all fine. It's part of the process. But both hold on to that excitement if you're on either side of the table to remember why you wanted to do this in the first place, both through the negotiations and the creative. And then also, to be wary of that as you're making the deal, that it's going to get ugly. And so you don't want to be resentful later, even though, yes, you're definitely going to make mistakes. So that would, I guess, be what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems that people face in the business is deals that are over-negotiated, and this is something that there's two outcomes that are bad in over-negotiating. One of the things about the entertainment business is you're going to probably be working with those people that you're negotiating with. And a lot of people try to shield it through agents and lawyers in order to not have that direct contact with somebody because they think that somehow that barrier is going to protect them from the relationship. But the truth is, it doesn't, because everybody knows that it came from you to begin with. And a lot of people approach a negotiation in the entertainment business kind of like, buying a rug at an Istanbul street market. And, you're haggling with somebody, and you haggle with them, and you get the price down, and you finally walk away with your Berber rug, and you go, wow, I got this incredible deal. And your friend next to you says, man, he probably didn't make any money on it. And you say, well, yeah, but he wouldn't have made the deal with me if he didn't want to, so he obviously did. Great, well, you're never going to see that rug dealer again. Because you're going to get on the plane and you're going to leave. In the movie business, you're going to be dealing with that person maybe for the next year or two in a relationship where you've got to work together and cooperate. And this goes whether you're dealing with a financier or you're dealing with a crew member, a DP, a gaffer, a sound man, at whatever level you're dealing with it. If you push people too hard, they might do it. But then you've damaged the relationship that you might have with them in the future. So that's one very important thing to consider. The other thing that happens with over-negotiating is you lose the deal. And I've been in deals like where that happened. I had years ago a series that was greenlit at a network. And the production company that I was working with, and I wasn't running, but somebody else was and was in charge of the negotiation, literally blew the deal. It was a run. We were weeks away from the upfronts where they were going to announce it, and they just hammered and hammered and hammered. And finally, it was a big studio, said, sorry, you just pushed us too far. So what's important to know is to get a sense of where a deal should close in the sense of appropriateness, fairness, and workability. And that's where you aim. You don't aim for the absolute best you can pull out of something. You aim for where the fair point is. And usually the other person, if they've been around for a while, has a pretty good idea also where that fair point is, and they're headed to the same place. So it's very important not to go too far out of those parameters, because you're going to create damage at that point that's going to be very hard to recoup from. That's my little thing.
All right, well, those were all great answers. Thank you. Let's open it up for questions. Does anyone? Yes, fast hand.
I'm coming from the tech industry. I used to work for Qualcomm
Wait, may I ask you a tiny thing? They're recording us, so if you can speak a little bit for those people watching at home or their office.
From the tech industry. So I used to work for Qualcomm, and I got interested in the entertainment industry, investing, doing producing, that kind of deal. And from coming from the tech side, one of the things that a lot of what I hear today is the balance between creative and business. And that's been a struggle for me. Because, yeah, you do want the best deal, you want to be efficient, but at the same time, you want stuff that's sold. Obviously, if you have all the great parts put together, but they don't work together, it doesn't matter. It's not going to work. So in your experience, how did you find, in the deal-making process, how did you find that balance? Because it's really complicated for us that are, strictly business, because we're thinking numbers. We're thinking, okay, we need to think about the future. How are we going to make this happen? But on the creative side, we're thinking, okay, we want stories, and good stories that last. We don't want something that's just, all right, this just works now because this is the hot trend, but then next year it's something completely different. So I'm just interested to hear your responses on that.
I'm not sure what the question, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure what the question is. I mean, I can't.
Is it how do you hold on to the creative side when you have to be looking at the numbers?
Well, most people who specialize, most people in this business specialize in one or the other. That's not to say there are not crossover people, but like most people would be categorized as one or the other, right?
That's true.
My agent is great sounding board and knows what's going on, and I think has a great creative friend. He would never call himself creative, right? That does not mean that we all don't have abilities that go beyond our core competency. But if you think of people this is a business of specialization, right? I mean, and to a good extent, right? If you need a plumber, you want someone who that's what they do, that's all they do. If you wanted to hire a CFO, you would want someone who loves numbers. Now, it is difficult as an entrepreneur because you got to wear a lot of hats. So I guess the answer I would give is try and focus mostly on what you're exceptional at, like a superhero. Aquaman is great at swimming. If you have a problem underwater, don't call Superman. Even though he can do it, go for Aquaman. And find somebody else who can help you on the other piece that you may not be as exceptional at. Because the place that you are the best at is where you will get the most traction, and then supplement it with friends or agents or partners in whatever way you can do. That way you build the whole package of you don't have to be perfect, you just have to try and be perfect together.
Just so we don't run out of time for questions, unless someone has a burning answer that they want to give, I'll throw it out there. Does anybody else want to chime in on that? All righty. Any other questions? Yes? Before anyone answers me, I just give a quick thing since I'm a lawyer too. I would say when I started in the biz and all the technical stuff, I was really paranoid at the start. Like the lawyer on the opposite side from me knows everything. Then I realized, oh, none of us know any of this because it's changing minute to minute. So my new theory is just plow ahead, read, whatever, and know that the person on the other side probably feels like you. Sorry,
I think
go ahead.
that's the best answer, I feel like you can't stress out about it too much, and really it's about, to me, I kind of going back to what you were saying, like leading with the creators, right? And they're usually the ones who, a lot of times, if that piece is going to be strong, you're going to be able to figure out the right home for it. But yeah, nobody knows.
I talk to my interns, the millennials.
Yes.
Yeah. We ask,
That's a good point.
Are you watching?
we constantly ask, what are the kids
Or
doing
younger
these days?
relatives.
Literally saying, what are the kids doing these days?
Yeah.
I'm sure they love
Because
that.
Your 12-year-old needs.
what they don't like. But yeah, I mean, it's that there is a it's so cliche, but there's a generational shift in the way people are watching content, what content they're watching. I mean, as an example, the kind of preferred default sport for young millennials is video games now, watching people play competitive video games, not as it was for me growing up the NBA, not as it was for people 10 years ago the NFL. It's like the default is watching other people play League of Legends. That is a phase shift for ESPN and all these other companies. So I do think you have to kind of be watching what a generation below us are doing. But if it's about technology, it's Wired, Fast Company. I go to South by. I mostly look at what's going on in the tech side, not what's actually going on in the film side. Conferences like this, I think there's a few tracks here that are a bit more about technology. It's like,
All right,
I
we
think
probably,
And specifically on platforms, there's a newsletter called Video Inc., thevideoinc.com, which I think just went behind a paywall, but is, I think, the best at covering new platforms, what's happening in the digital space.
And Tube Filter is still free. That's the kind of counterpart to videoing. That's
Yeah.
True.
really good.
all right, I think we have time for one more. We're being kicked out at exactly 1 o'clock because some other panel climbs up here, so any other question? Oh, yes, the person with the hat? Hello.
How many times do you think a content creator can go to the same studio or production company or, manager or agent
You mean with the same project or with different one?
before they get the hint that maybe it's rap, it's not
As many times as the turnover at that place? No, just kidding, just kidding.
Well, listen, I think as a general rule, people like shiny and new, right? So no one wants to feel like they're someone's second choice, whether it's personal or professional. But that having said, it's a guideline, not a rule, which is to say sometimes, you go in and you get feedback or the market changes or you have a different relationship or you bring in a different element and it's worth going back in. I mean, I think the adage is, as a producer, your job is, the PGA mantra is make it happen, right? That's what producing is, making it happen and sometimes never giving up. Now, you never know whether never giving up was a total waste of time or was the thing that led you to success until after it happens. That is the mystery.
Yeah, it's like a rule that's made to be broken that a pass is a pass, but also Sofia Coppola tracked Bill Murray down to the end of the earth to get him in Lost in Translation after he passed 5 times, and she was just like, "You're the only person for me," and she finally got him in. So it's like that rule is made to be broken, but I think again, get good at reading the signals of the person on the other side of that conversation and whether they're legitimately interested in seeing it again or they're just being nice about passing.
Do you guys take multiple if you've already heard the pitch, do you just have no interest in hearing it again?
I just feel like it needs to have a new element. Otherwise, just rehearing the exact same thing again a couple of years later. Although sometimes,
Well, the market changes,
the market
right?
does change, and then
trends are
yeah.
happening. I mean, I have multiple projects that it's taken me longer than 3 years plus to
Yeah,
get on air.
that's true.
Literally the same exact project. Nothing new, just I always believed in it. Now, is that a good use of my time? I don't know. I mean, I got it made, but, maybe I would have been better if I had given up, right? Who knows? But, but you don't know, right? But I believed in it, so I feel good about it.
Renee, if they change the money, could they come back to you, or that's not really a factor, it's really the content?
Well, us personally, everything we do is story-driven. So I would say if kind of the script or the kind of creative part of the project hasn't changed, then the question's always going to be why, or why should we or why are we reconsidering it? Because typically, if it's a creative pass, it's a kind of a creative pass forever, unless everybody at the company turns over. To your point, then come back to us. Sure.
Yeah, people get fired.
Yeah, when I get fired, come back to us.
Andrew, what about on the feature side? Have you ever taken something that you have already said no to? Did you ever change your mind?
Not usually. There are things that I've kind of put on a kind of back burner and then recycled back in and found another way that make it work because there was something I liked about it. But if I really don't like something to begin with, I usually just because I'm my own entrepreneur and I run my own company, I have to be excited about something. I don't do things, and I'm different than a lot of people in that I don't do deals to do deals. I do deals with projects that I can get excited about personally and that inspire me. And so if it doesn't, it's not going to, doesn't matter what venue, what outlet I might try to sell it to, it's not going to get me going. But I have found things that can be cycled in a different direction, like a feature that can become a series, or you know, a thing that I thought was a big budget movie, and I can find a way to do it as a little tiny family film, you know, on a low budget. So there are things that change, but they're usually in the kind of, they're in that little outer ring of Saturn that I can kind of pull back in again.
Well, thank you very much to our wonderful panel, and thank you, audience. Oh, I was also told to make this announcement because somebody else is supposedly jumping on the stage, although I don't see anybody. They must be out. We're told to ask the questions back there if you have any questions for the panel. Thank you.